Ça va?
Ah, comme ça. Comme ci, comme ça.
Comme ci, comme ça.
Comme ci, comme ça.
Ça va, et toi?
Ok,
Comme ci,
ben.
comme ça. Ça va. Ça va, et toi? Comme ci, comme ça.
Comme ci, comme ça.
Comme ci, comme ça.
All right. We need to talk. If you've ever learned French in a traditional classroom setting, or you know someone who has, there's a really good chance you were told that comme ci comme ça is a perfectly appropriate answer to the question comment ça va in French. It's in virtually every French textbook out there. Now, here's the problem. Not only is comme ci comme ça not a standard French greeting, but I would even argue that it shouldn't be considered modern French at this point, and it definitely shouldn't be so systematically taught in French classes. And I'm gonna tell you why. First of all, the first time I heard the phrase comme ci comme ça, actually I didn't really hear it, I read it. I was in my 20s. I was born and raised in France. I was still living in France at the time and had never heard that phrase up until that point. So what happened is I was taking a course on how to teach French as a foreign language, and I had to write a report on a French textbook, and I picked one that catered to American students. When I saw Comme ci comme ça in the greeting section, which is typically in the beginning chapters of those books, I honestly thought, maybe they teach Canadian French in America. Well, as it turns out, Comme ci comme ça isn't much of a thing in Canada either. So when I moved to California and I started teaching French here, I basically went from never hearing Comme ci comme ça while growing up and living in France to hearing it from my American students an average of what, 600 times a day? On a slow day? There's a little bit of a disconnect here. So you might be wondering, why do students learn Comme ci comme ça at school if it's not relevant, if it's not used outside of the classroom? Exactly. One reason is there's a very strong status quo bias when it comes to teaching not just French, but other foreign languages as well. Most French textbooks on the market have not been properly updated over time, and what it does is it maintains some conformity within the school system for language classes. Of course, that goes way beyond Comme ci comme ça. Comme ci comme ça is just the tip of the iceberg. At the end of the day, it's about getting instructors to stick to an established system that's been the norm for a very long time. Another reason why Comme ci comme ça is being kept alive in classrooms is that teachers used to be students. And when students become teachers, they tend to teach what they were taught as students. That's how cycles work. Most people don't get to go live abroad for an extended period of time to realize that a lot of what we learn in language classes is actually not very useful in the real world. It's not reflective of the way native speakers actually interact with one another in their countries. So you really can't blame the instructors who teach Comme ci comme ça and say Comme ci comme ça on a daily basis. It's just that the system currently in place is lagging behind the real world. So usually when I say, you probably shouldn't say Comme ci comme ça, it's not really used, it's not a thing, don't. Some people feel hurt by that because Comme ci comme ça has been a part of their French experience since day one, literally. They've been using it so much they're like emotionally attached to it. So sometimes they'll be like, wait, maybe it's not used in France, but what if it's used in other French-speaking countries? And that's a really good question. It's not easy for me to prove that Comme ci comme ça is very rarely used in every French-speaking country. But when you start looking into it and you ask native speakers who are currently living in a francophone country if they know anybody who says Comme ci comme ça, it becomes pretty obvious that Comme ci comme ça is not commonly used at all because they all have to pause and think before answering, and it always feels like a tricky question to them. I'm actually going to use an analogy to show you how that works. If English is your first language, which it probably is, you're watching this video, how likely are you to say so-so to someone asking you how you're doing? And how often do you hear it used around you? No one's ever said to me they're doing so-so in the US. It's not a standard greeting here. I recently had a British student and I asked her, do you guys say so-so a lot? Because I didn't know. And she said, no, we don't. I believe her. In America, there's also a cultural aspect to consider, which brings up another interesting point. Why would you give a loaded answer to an empty question? Because most of the time when people ask you how you're doing, they're just being polite. They don't really want to know about your problems, do they? In the intro, you saw a bunch of American actors say comme ci comme ça to their interviewers, which brings a negative vibe to the conversation right off the bat. They would have never said that in English. Normally, you don't start whining to a random stranger who's just trying to do their job and be nice to you by asking you how you're doing, right? Now, the same goes for Spanish. If Spanish is your first language, it has to be your first language, not your second. You didn't learn it in a classroom. Would you say así así to describe how you're doing to someone? All you have to do is Google así así so-so, and you'll find a bunch of discussion forums where people are asking the same question. They're like, do people really say así así? Because they learn it at school and then they never hear it again when they travel. And I'm actually going to read you a comment I found in one of those forums. According to this person whose username is Juan Pasillo, así así is commonly taught by non-native speakers and probably by heritage speakers like the Spanglish-speaking Mexicans out west. Nonetheless, in all my travels and years in Latin America and Spain, I've never heard a native speaker use it. And the ones I've asked about it don't really know what it means. It's amazing that this incorrect and mostly incomprehensible translation has become so common among Americans using Spanish and Spanglish speakers. So you can see this accuracy issue affects more than one language in the educational system. How useful, how practical, how realistic are the vocabulary, the phrases, and even the sentence constructions that we learn in language classes once we take them to the real world? Shouldn't usefulness and practicality be a requirement in foreign language curricula? So now that I've shared my opinion, I'm going to read a few comments that I found online on this topic to see what some other people have to say based on their own experience. Alright, so here the question is, quelles sont les phrases françaises qu'un étudiant de la langue apprend, mais que les Français ne disent jamais? What are the French phrases, I guess is what they meant, because phrase actually means sentences, and phrase is expression in French. What are the French phrases that a student of the language learns, but that the French never say? And the first response was, comme ci comme ça. Personne ne dit ça, nobody says that. Si quelqu'un me demande comment ça va, est-ce que ça serait normal de répondre comme ci comme ça, en supposant que ce soit vraiment le cas? Un ami m'a dit que bien qu'étant grammaticalement correcte, cette expression semble bizarre dans ce contexte et on ne l'utilise pas couramment. Est-il bien vrai? Yes, it is. Apparemment, il a entendu cette explication de son prof de français. Yep, his French teacher knows. I have never heard any French person, whether young or old, using comme ci comme ça. The expression exists, though, and is understood. From my experience, it is widely known by foreign people learning French, and not only native English speakers. I have heard it in Central Europe, too. Is comme ci comme ça still the current expression? I was talking to a native French girl last month, and I told her that after 3 years of high school French, all I could say was bonjour, je m'appelle, ça va, and comme ci comme ça. She laughed at the last one and said, do they really teach that? No one says that. How common is it to use the phrase comme ci comme ça in French to express I'm doing more or less when asked how are you? So I'm guessing this person's first language might be Spanish. Not that common at all. It certainly doesn't sound odd. I think it sounds odd. Perhaps only slightly quaint. I think it sounds super quaint. But it's gradually falling out of use in modern French. It's like essentially dead at this point. I don't get it why all the French teachers make a point to teach this phrase to their students when it's hardly ever used. Good point. Here a French teacher actually replied to that last comment and she said, comme ci comme ça has been a standard expression in French textbooks in the US forever since I started studying it in 1963 and throughout my teaching career. I never knew it wasn't the standard way to say so-so. But then again, is so-so the standard way to answer the question, how are you in English? I'm asking you. What do you think? I would never respond comme ci comme ça, and actually, I never heard a native French speaker respond to me that, neither in France nor in Belgium. All right. I am rather over 40, and I don't think Comme Ci Comme Ça has been in common usage for quite some time. My own fairly automatic response is pas trop mal. Pas trop mal is not too bad in French, and it's a really common response. It's a good option. I have always been of the opinion that when people ask, how are you? They do not really want to know. It's just a polite noise, so a brief and understated response has always seemed called for. To say comme ci comme ça sounds to me slightly génial. Génial is French for whiny, and I agree. And comme ci comme ça sounds a bit immature as well, a little bit childlike. My phonetics professor at University of Laval in Quebec said to me that she's pretty much never heard the expression comme ci comme ça used except by Anglophones, and she's lived in the city of Quebec for 15 years or so now, if I remember correctly. She figured for quite a while, due to having taught it in classes using standard French foreign language textbooks, that it's more of a French phrase than Québécois phrase, but upon going to Paris, she still never heard it. It has become quite rare. Maybe we say it when a foreigner asks ça va, how are you, because we know that's the answer he expects from his French classes. But we'll never say it to another French person. So there you have it. It's completely okay to let go of comme ci comme ça if you're ready. You don't have to, you can still say it, it's perfectly legal. I just wanted to make sure that people know what's going on so they can make an informed decision. You do you. Please let me know in the comments if you disagree with something I said, or if you have a story about Comme Ci Comme Ça you'd like to tell. I wish this were an interactive conversation, but I'm happy to talk about this more in the comments with you guys. In my next video, I'll be sharing some authentic greetings that are safe to use in French today. And of course, I'll be including some great alternatives to Comme Ci Comme Ça, which native speakers actually use in everyday conversations. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to help this channel grow, and I will see you soon. Bye.